Hi, my name's Irrelevant, and in a previous video, I took apart this Traynor Signature Amp and found that it was heavily modified. Well, maybe not heavily, but modified nonetheless. So today, I'm gonna take apart the second head, which I believe is stock. We can take a look and see what these amps were actually like inside. Or will we? Now these both have the same model number, YGA-1A signature amplifier, even though they are clearly slightly different amps, and you'll see why once I get the chassis out. Question is, do we have loose bolts again? Yep, so we'll have to reach in there and find all these bolts. Later models of the amp, the bolt would have been welded onto the chassis, so they were easier to get apart. These ones are tricky, especially when you have to get your fingers back in there to put them back together again. Right. All right. Will this one slip out easy this time? Yes, easier. And the chassis top plate's coming with it. I don't know if they intend to have these things glued in there. Whenever I've worked on them, sometimes they're glued, sometimes they're loose, but that's the metal cover. Good for Oh, wow. Interesting. Interesting. Now, the funny thing is, of all these amps that I've worked on, they do slightly deviate from the schematics. And I do immediately notice that this is a different looking amp inside. And one thing that stands out is it appears to have had a full cap job. Those are newer caps, those are newer caps, and those are newer caps. Now, the question is, I still see we have two of the original, or wait, there's four. That's the other thing that's different about these. The other amp had two large can capacitors. This one has four smaller ones instead. 40 UF 450. Question is, are those new replacements too? We can see burn marks in here, which suggests that they have been worked on. And I'm wondering if this is a higher voltage amp, because sometimes what they used to do was they used to connect capacitors in series to handle the higher voltages. So they would have, you know, one capacitor jumping over to another capacitor. And often they would have a can capacitor, and then inside they would have one of these more standard capacitors. So there probably were capacitors here before, and they upgraded those. This black connects to the negative this capacitor, so yes, that's cascaded. This one goes directly to ground and connects up to the choke, and those two connect together. And then we have a couple hiding underneath the circuit board here, which appears to be where this wire is going. Like, those cans should have been changed too, not just the internal ones, but I guess it's the thought that counts, right? Now let's look at the power supply section here. We have 6 diodes, like what I saw in the schematics. It goes to the standby switch. Ah, yes. The standby matches the schematics too. Like, for the most part, this circuit is mostly stock. Here's our bias. Look at that old diode. That's a more different diode. And then that taps off the main power. Yeah. Our bias resistor is hiding down in there. But what is going on here? Oof. Someone did work on this, and I don't think they did it right. So these two connections here are for the screen grids, but we have what appear to be two different resistors on the screen grids. That's not right. That color's so faded. 470 ohms. So that's correct. There's supposed to be, according to the schematic, 470 ohm going to the screen grid. That should be a 472. So after the choke, there should be a 4.7K linking over to the next circuit, which is this here, but that's not a 47K. It says 41 ohm. And then in the schematic, the screen grid's supposed to have both 470 ohms. So what the hell is this? 560. So they have a 470 on one side and a 560 on the other. Is this some sort of half-assed attempt to rebalance the circuit? Like, there are weird trickeries like that that get used, but they're not necessarily right. Oh, great. We have a jack that has lost. We are lucky that didn't short out. That's no good. We also see that pin 1 is missing, which means we can never use EL34s or 6CA7s in this. And indeed, another way this amp differs, and it's also in the schematic, is it uses 7027 tubes, which are very similar to 6L6s. Essentially, they were a 6L6 with a slightly different pinout. All the same pins that existed were the same, but it added 2 pins. Whereas 6L6s, most tubes don't use pin 1 and pin 6. This would also have pin 1 and pin 6. And pin 1 was on the screen grid, not the suppressor grid. So if you plug the 7027 into an amp wired normally, you could have a bad time. This will, however, take 6L6s and KT88s and 6550s and stuff like that that I would opt to put into a bass amp. Now, a little history on this amp, if you didn't watch the other video, is the Signature is the guitar version of the Bassmaster. They have identical preamp circuits. And I already discussed what the Bassmaster significance is in the other video. Go watch that if you'd like more history. So yeah, different power supply section, different tube complements. It's funny that to get 2 identical heads and have them be that different. But for the most part, other than the fact that someone tried to upgrade the capacitors in here, it's pretty much stock. The value of these guys in the preamp circuit has changed too. Those are 223Js, so that's going to be a 0.022, whereas often in these amps they use a 0.1. The 22 is more common in modern amps. It's going to let a little bit less bass through and have a cleaner tone. This amp compared to the other one has a nice fat bass sound, and that could be part and parcel that it has the cap upgrade. Man, over here, if you look at some of these extensive burn markings, it almost looked like they were interested in trying to remove those capacitors. Like, you got to change those out too. Unless they did remove them and those are replacements, but the ground switch is properly completely disconnected. They did a pretty good job updating this to a proper 3-prong cable. It's just, you know, it got, I guess over time, a little frayed here. And now it'll need to be corrected again. Where's the ground point? Ah, they soldered it over here. Yeah, that's good. That's fine. That's funny. 2 amps, identical, both been worked on in different ways. The other one needs a cap job, but also 2 different circuits. All right. Well, I know this thing's safe to fire up other than this jack here is loose. Maybe I can find a nut for that. I couldn't find a washer, but I did manage to find a nut that fits. So that'll be fine for our purposes. So what do we have here? Westinghouse, a Westinghouse 72027. Das old bud. I've already tinkered with this amp. These tubes, Rogers. Is that the same Rogers we know and love here in Canada? It also says Holland on it. Holland and Rogers. Well, I'm not familiar with that brand, but you know, they had all sorts. I couldn't tell you what tubes would originally come with this. That's what's funny you find about old Traynor amps. So many of them still have the original tubes in them. And that's what's ultra funny about them. If you're Canadian and you're a guitarist or a bassist, Traynor was like your first tube amp. Really, it was. Because at one point in the day, you could buy these puppers at the Hawk Shop. Any Hawk Shop would have a couple in stock and they'd only be like 250 bucks. They were cheap. They've gone up in value now, especially this one's going to be pretty good because it's mostly original and in good condition. But the thing is, they never change the tubes on them. They always have the same damn old worn out tubes. And that's one of the reasons why, until the internet shed light on how good these amps are, nobody took them seriously. Heck, some might joke that they're a training amp, and that's what Traynor meant. It'd be your first amp, you'd go, you'd buy it, you'd try to jam out with them. Oh, it sounds like crap, all sorts of problems with it. Oh, why don't we retube it? Oh, because it's only a $250 amp. It's gonna cost that much or more to retube it. Oh, just flip it and get another one. So, yeah, a lot of them were ill-fated unless someone like me acquired them. Not that they had a better fate with me, because I would gut them and do all sorts of science experiments on them. All right, we're set up for power now. Let's get her warmed up. Let's get the original cab going. Oh, I forgot to hook up my power meter. All right, listen to that. Oh, they're not even the same tube. This is a GE, and we're not getting a current reading out of this tube here. It's making noise, but this one's not really getting hot. Is this tube that bad? Oh boy. Now let me ask you something. What in the heck happened here? You see that stain right there? Was this screen grid resistor always blown to shit? What the hell happened here? Was that my bias mod that did that? I don't think I've ever used this with a 7027. How do I have this wired internally? Okay, so that's totally my bad there, bud. You see, because my little bias adapter tool doesn't have a pin 1 on this side, I have pin 1 and 8 connected internally, so it'll still be compatible with EL34s and 6CA7s. However, The 7027 has pin 1 and 4 connected internally, 4 being the screen grid, which means as soon as I plug this thing in and turn the amp on, it overloaded and fried this poor little pupper right there. But that's okay, because why they moved that to a 560, I don't know. But really, they should have 1Ks instead. So I guess Buddy's getting a free upgrade. That's a standard thing that I do to all my amps. If they have 470 ohm resistors, I replace them with 1K resistors. I forget why. This is something I've been doing so long, there was a reason for it. It made it universally compatible with all tubes. Yeah, I don't remember. If you had asked me like maybe 10 years ago why I upgrade to 1K, I would have had more of an answer. But now I've forgotten. All I know is it's a good idea. So we're gonna have to take out the old heat iron here and hope that she's got some heat for us. This is freaking sloppy anyway, look at that. Like, I don't know about the guy who installed this. This solder joint here on this peg almost looks cold. So this one looks original. And what is this gob right here? It's just gobular gob of broken. This wire is kind of loosely on there. Yeah, it's a situation where they just clipped out the old one, but they didn't take the time to actually nicely unsolder it. You know, the old ones are twisted on there right nice. You know, some vintage amps on the market, they're made to a price point, but the Traynors, they're from, they don't build it like they used to philosophy. Like, some of the way this amp is wired is not technically to electrical code anymore. They couldn't sell this anymore and have it pass. And one of the reasons why electrical code works the way it does for electronic devices is in case something goes wrong. But that's because we have robots making dinky little solder joints on delicate PCBs. Stuff today isn't made in such a way where some guy hand soldered with large amounts of globby solder and like carefully wrapping the components around a post. You know, this thing doesn't have to worry about electrical code because it's not going to fall apart with loose solder joints like a modern amp will. It just has to worry about a guy like me going in there and accidentally frying a resistor. Sacrifices to the gods of tone. Or a guy like the last one doing sloppy work. You know, I know Traynors well. I've spent hours upon hours upon hours working inside these chassis. This is all very familiar work to me. That's how I learned how to work and modify amps, on old Traynors. I have 3 Traynor heads, 2 of them are heavily modified. All right, it looks ugly from this perspective. This solder looks like it might have been lead free, the last guy was using too. No amp tech who knows what they're actually doing is gonna use lead free solder. All right, let's get the components wrapped back on here. It's funny, might want to dress up some of these other solder joints while I'm in here. They look slop. All right, let's get these 1Ks in place. Unfortunately, they're not quite as long as the last ones, so a nice wrap's not going to be as possible. Oh, by the way, if you're watching my channel, be advised I'm an experienced technician when it comes to stuff like this. Might not look like it because of that mistake I just made, but for the most part, I know what I'm doing inside these amps. I don't even think to mention safety procedure. Remember, this amp's like 440 volts, so if you don't know what you're doing, thing is, you get to a point where you get so used to working on these things, it's almost kind of complacent, but it's not really complacency, it's muscle memory. You're just so used to doing things a certain way, like you don't even think about the safety anymore because you just do it. You know that the capacitors could be hot, you know to give them time to discharge, you know that your solder joints are hot, but you stick your fingers in there and get burned anyway. In short, if I have to tell you to unplug the amp, then you really shouldn't be working on these amps. Okay, that's connected back to normal. Just this last screen grid connection right here. Wrap it around nice. There we go. 1K upgrade. It just means that we cannot use this bias tool with the 7027s. I don't have a single 7027 in my inventory. They are a specialty tube used in certain old amps. No modern amp I'm aware of uses them, and they're pretty much the same thing as a 6L6. So if I retube this amp, I'm not even putting 7027s back in it. All right. So let's go back to the testing phase of this operation. No bias check on these. I'm gonna show you the condition of these tubes, and then I'm gonna put something nicer in there, and then we'll do a bias check. Okay, I don't smell any burning this time. This tube's definitely active again. You hear that? Can you hear that noise the amp's making? This tube is shot. That one's a little tighter. I swear I heard these rattling more last time I tested this amp. Oh. All right, well, let's plug in. I'm getting an out of balance hum. Huh. Shot tubes, shot tubes, shot tubes, shot tubes. Now I forgot to check to see if the capacitor was in place, but channel B is supposed to be the bright channel. A clean amp with no reverb just doesn't sound right to me. So this is dimed out. It has a good tone, and that cab's got some nice warm resonance to it. Better than I expected out of one of these old cabs. I wonder what it would do with like awesome drivers in it. But that's like nowhere near as loud as we're expecting it to be. Let's try channel A. We're seeing the voltages drop down to 400 volts, but then they're sitting at like 415 as it stands right now. Let's bring that down. Now the tremolo starts fast on this amp. That's the slowest it goes. All right, so we know it works. And it doesn't sound too bad for a clean amp. In fact, I find this amp takes pedals well. I got an interesting sound out of it using an old Boss DS1 distortion. But what we're gonna do here is we're gonna switch this pupper out with some better tubes. Like the last amp, these two are gonna be JJ E83CCs. And for the phase inverter, my preferred Tungsol 12AX7. And I already have a Sovtek 5751 that is the tremolo. Oh yes, did I mention, unlike the Garnet amp that I recently worked on, the tremolo circuit in these Traynors use a full tube, not just a half a tube. And these shot-ass Schottky diodes, ow, that's hot. There's a certain section here, they're not that hot, but down here by the plates, oh boy. Let's go get something that I know I'll like in these amps. Tungsol 7581As in Tube Store 23. Now, these ones I know are going to be compatible with my bias meter. Alrighty then. Now let's turn it on. Hopefully, not pop any resistors this time. Ah, working properly now. We're just going to have to watch our bias, but we can go as high as 4850 at voltages this low. The amp's quieter. There's no off-balance hum. 46 at 410 so far. 18 watts idle. Target idle is 24 watts. These are 35 watt rated tubes. It looks like these tubes sitting in a proper bias. Now notice this. Oh, no noises. Okay, as much as my ears are gonna hate me, I should really get ear protection when I do stuff like this. Let's hear how it sounds cranked. geez, it had a really sweet tone with parallel mode, but then when I switched to standard humbucker mode, now I was on the neck pickup there. Let's go to the bridge. That's actually a pretty cute little tone right there. I can see it, I can see it. Why people might have liked the good old-fashioned JTM 45s and whatnot. So, I wonder how this will take overdrive. It might actually get a bit louder. But yeah, this is getting like, I need some ear protection. All right, Malmsteen overdrive in the same setting as the other one. Let's dimer. Pause. Something smelling funny. Wouldn't that be funny if I blow this amp? These transformers, you ain't gonna kill them with this. And so far this bias is reading like, okay, so we know we have a 24 watt target for 70%. By 4.8, we're at 19 watts right now. Let's give her a quick crank. We could say about 390 at 100, 39 watts, 40 watts a tube. Now let's kick on the overdrive. We'll say 388 at 95, 36 watts a tube. So that's kind of right in the rating of those tubes. So that's perfectly okay. Well, I can't correctly hear the tone with ear protection in, but I can feel that this combination of this cab and this head, it's got a little bit of balls. And that actually sounded like a pretty clean distortion. It sounded a bit better than the other one. Maybe I get the peel of the whole cranked amp tone, you know? I've never really played around with it much because my amps are so insanely loud, you just can't. And, you know, good metal amps, they have all the preamp distortion you need. So as long as you have a good set of power tubes on it and a good cab, you don't need that cranked amp sound. But this is impressive that this amp sounds like that. This is the first time I played with something with quite this kind of schematic. It almost really makes me want to have this amp in my own collector. But, you know, this was just sitting in the corner of their garage collecting dust. It's kind of like, you know what, man? You should use this thing. It's the same guy who I fixed up that Vox for, and I think that kind of sounds better than the Vox, especially with the loud indie volume levels they like to play. Now, that said, at normal volume levels, I did notice something while playing around with this amp already, and that it actually has a pretty sweet bass tone, even with that cab. And I'm not sure how well it's going to translate over into this recording, but... Now, it hasn't got enough volume for bass to actually jam with a band unless you're a much quieter band, but like even at moderate volumes. You know, assuming you're not, you know, in a bedroom waking up your parents or in an apartment building with paper thin walls, that's a nice little practice amp. You can turn the volume down low, turn up the bass knob a bit. Yeah, now I already have a Traynor custom reverb that does clean with reverb and sounds pretty much as good as this for bass, but yeah. The cab farts out at higher volumes though. I don't know if this is a bass cab. Don't turn it up too loud with this cab, but I actually plugged this into my Ampeg cabs earlier and... Well, the 59 Fender Bassman circuit, the JTM 45 circuit, and the Traynor Bassmaster circuit. This is the guitar version, and indeed, it is a very nice guitar amp from the time. It's got some nice sweet tone there when you crank her out, and then if you give her overdrive, as you can see, you could do some metal with this. So assuming you're not afraid to get loud, because I do think for guitar and overdrive, this could probably keep up with a pretty loud band. You know, there's a lot you could do with this amp. I almost want to bring it back to Buddy, say, hey, try this with some better tubes and get a little bit of OD. Maybe plug it into your Vox cab and then tell me what you want to think. In the meantime, I'm not gonna be able to do much more with this amp because I'm not gonna touch on it or modify it at all. The only last thing I'm gonna do before we call it quits is I did smell something suspicious coming from this amp when I cranked it up with the overdrive. So the question is, can we locate that smell? Oh, yes. That is a thing. That is a thing that exists. You see that brown marking there? Those resistors were getting really hot, and as they were getting hot, they were starting to, you know, that existing stain that's there from the old resistor spewing its guts out, put all this, you know, kind of enamel stuff, and it was kind of roasting that off. Now these aren't, they're getting overloaded. I need a higher value resistor here. I have some 5 watts that I'm gonna put in here, and then that should solve that problem, and then she'll be good. Man, this is a sweet little amp. I like it, and I hope you liked it too. Ah! I'm stuck!